Let's talk about shooting pro video on an iPhone. Of course, we've seen a lot of content about shooting video on the iPhone. Apple releases all of their stuff saying shot on iPhone, and then there are creators on YouTube who shoot stuff on iPhone, and everybody wants you to believe that shooting on an iPhone is a beautiful experience. Now, the iPhone 15 Pro Max and the 16 Pro and Pro Max, those are amazing phones, and what Apple has been able to do as far as making these cameras really work and shoot amazing video content, it is a miracle. I mean, they're tiny sensors and they do such a good job, and the software is really great. But what's the actual experience like shooting on one of these? I mean, can you take a small little compact setup like this where you have a phone, a external hard drive or solid state drive so that you can write all those files to something other than your phone's memory? What's the experience like shooting like this? So I just got back from a work trip. I went to cover a VR headset, and I took my phone. I took this basic setup right here. I mean, this is really what I took. And then I also took the DJI Osmo Pocket 3 because I wasn't feeling 100% confident in this setup. But I did end up filming the majority of what I went to capture with this setup. So I have 5 things that I want to talk about that were big realizations that I had, because this was the first time that I went from just shooting a couple of clips here and there for fun to really trying to get through a whole day of covering a new product launch and recording my own thoughts and different things like that. It was definitely a bit challenging. So first of all, let's talk about the biggest challenge, which is the battery life of your phone. When you are shooting ProRes video or a lot of video content with your phone, it is going to destroy your battery. On top of that, it's your phone, so you're probably using it for other things. If you were to buy a additional phone so that you can use that for this type of setup, and you're looking to spend, $1,200, $1,500 on a second phone so that you can do this, you would just buy a camera. You would not buy a second phone and create something like this. There'd be absolutely really no point, because a camera, a $1,500, $1,600 camera, is going to provide a lot more benefit and value than a setup like this. You're simply doing this because it's your phone, it does a great job, and the content is already going to be pretty much readily available for you to use on your phone. Maybe you want to travel lightweight, you don't want to take a whole bunch of extra stuff. I don't know what your reasoning might be, but for me, it was, I want to travel light, I want one backpack. I knew I was going to be leaving that event and flying back. I didn't have anywhere to store any luggage. I wanted a lightweight setup, and that's what I ended up with. I arrived at that event with a full battery. I had 100% battery. I plugged in the SSD. I opened up the Apple camera app and started filming in ProRes log. And I was so far enjoying my experience. Occasionally, I jumped back and forth into the Blackmagic app as well, and then back into the regular camera app. And then I sat down for the keynote, which the keynote was about a half hour long, and I filmed different parts and segments of that. Then I went and filmed a little bit of B-roll that I was going to use in the video as well, and I decided to check my battery. Now, I hadn't even gotten to the product demo yet. We still had about half of the day left. I checked the battery on my phone, and I was at 20% battery, and I thought to myself, wow, there's no way this is sustainable for me to continue on. I had probably filmed, I'd say maybe about 15 to 20 minutes worth of content, and I was at 20% battery. So I know that the SSD is going to use a little bit of power. The phone is powering the SSD, and so that's a factor. And I did not have any external battery connected. Now, I could do that because this device that I'm using here is MagSafe compatible, and it has a USB-C. If you could see that here, there's a USB-C connector right there, and that USB-C connector could go to some sort of an external battery. So now I'm looking at needing to add some sort of external battery to this setup. Whether I run a cable down into my pocket where there's a battery bank or something like that, I'm gonna have to have some sort of external power to keep my phone topped off, because it's going to go through the battery so quickly. I was really surprised. So if I'm doing that, if I'm taking this setup and I'm adding an external battery, I'm kind of defeating the purpose, because now I'm carrying several things. And so if I need a battery that's going to get me through probably the whole day, then I'm probably going to need something like this battery bank, which is a 25,600 milliamp battery with a rated capacity of 15,000 milliamps. And so this should be able to charge my phone, I'd say 3 to 4 times from 20% or so. And it definitely has the output to charge other things like my iPad or a MacBook Pro, being that this has a 100-watt output. So when you're carrying a device like this and your phone and this little contraption here, you're getting closer to the size of something like an A7C II. A Sony A7C II will shoot nice photos, it'll shoot video, it'll shoot to an internal SD card, and it has batteries that you can swap out as well. So that was my first problem, was battery life. I was not expecting my battery to get burned through that quickly. The second thing is the external storage. Now, this is a 1 terabyte phone. You can get the iPhone in up to 1 terabyte. And if you're going to be recording in very high resolution, ProRes log, you're going to end up burning through that storage pretty quickly. I'd record anywhere from a 3 to 5 minute segment of that keynote, and that would produce a file that was 3 to 4 gigs in size. Do that a bunch of times throughout the day, and you're going to eat up a bunch of storage on your phone. Now, it's probably going to be the best way to do it to actually write to the internal storage on the phone, because then you're not having to power an SSD and you'll get better battery life out of your phone. However, then later on, you have to transfer all of that data out of the phone to the SSD. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to number 5. So external storage is an option. Of course, this is a 1 terabyte Samsung T5 drive. It's one that I just had sitting around. I have some newer ones that are connected to my different cameras in here. And typically you can get these in up to 4 terabytes of storage, which is definitely a great option. And it is time saving if you can write from the phone to the SSD, because then you just take the SSD, plug it into your computer, and all of your files are there already. So I believe that the trade-off of external storage for a little bit of battery life is worth it. I don't know how much battery life that's consuming. I do have a device that can track how much power is passing through something, but it wouldn't work while trying to transfer data between a device. It's basically just for looking at how much draw is on a device, such as if I was charging my phone, how much power draw is taking place. I wouldn't be able to figure that out on the SSD. I just don't have that type of technology available. So if I'm going to be shooting to an external SSD, I'm most definitely going to need some sort of external power to help compensate for that sacrifice. The third thing to know is what to do with Apple Log. Now, obviously you don't have to shoot in Apple Log. You could shoot in Apple's basic color profile, and if you're in the Blackmagic camera app, there are a couple of other options there, as well as different file formats and different compression rates also. But if you're going to be shooting pro video, you most likely are going to want to shoot in Apple Log. So what were my experiences there? Typically, when I'm on a bigger camera and I'm shooting in a log profile, there are a few things to consider. First of all is how to expose your footage. When I'm shooting with a bigger camera, a lot of times I need to overexpose my footage a little bit, because then when I apply a color grade, everything tends to be underexposed and I have to boost that back up. And I didn't find that to be the case too much with the iPhone. It seemed to expose things pretty well. Of course, I was using auto exposure and I wasn't locking off my exposure when I was shooting, because things were just changing too much, too many different environmental factors, and so I was allowing the camera itself to identify those things. But I highly recommend testing that. Don't just assume that what the camera is capturing is going to be perfectly exposed, and the color grade that you apply can definitely affect that as well. So make sure that you do your testing before you go out and shoot with the iPhone. Other than that, Apple Log seems pretty easy to work with. I didn't experience any issues with autofocus, and auto exposure lock worked really well also. So next, let's talk about ergonomics. Now, I have this attached to a handle that makes it a little bit easier for me to hold this and kind of film with it, and maybe even use it for vlogging if I wanted to turn around and get my own opinion, which I didn't do when I was at this event. I actually set the device up and aligned it and used my Apple Watch as a preview monitor so that I could make sure that I was framed up appropriately, because I obviously wanted to use these cameras as opposed to the front-facing camera. But if I am to take this device off, so let's just go ahead and pop this off and hold this. This is not very ergonomically friendly for long-term use. Like, there's a big brick on the back, and while this is a bit of a device, it's a little bit heavy and it adds some weight to the phone. There are lighter weight devices, but I went with this because not only was it metal, which meant if I attached it to things, I wasn't going to have to worry about plastic breaking or pulling the threads out of something if too much pressure was applied. And I also wanted this to integrate well with these foul cam mounts that I use for pretty much all of my photography stuff. And that makes it easy for me to snap devices in and out of different mounts, and then they're nice and secure. There's a nice little lock here so that I can't get that out. And then I could just really easy pop this and slide that right back out. Very easy to utilize. So regardless of what I had on the back of the phone to hold an SSD, this is just, it's not enjoyable to film this way, to hold the device this way. I'd be trying to figure out how am I going to do this? What's the best practice here? So I'm going to want something like a little tripod, something that's also a handle, maybe even a bigger tripod so that I can get this off the ground a little bit more. And those are things that you're going to have to consider. It's not as ergonomic as a camera either. There's no real grip here. When I'm holding the phone, I've got the USB-C cable that's kind of in the way. I'm worried about that because if I'm writing files to it, I don't want this to become disconnected on accident because I bumped the cable or whatnot. So I'm being very mindful of that, trying not to cause any issues there. So I'm holding the phone a little weird. I'm considering the fact that if I slid the SSD over anymore, it would cover up one of the cameras, and so I've got to be careful there. And so at this point, I'm thinking about my equipment a lot more than I probably should, because while this phone has the capability to shoot in these ways, it's not necessarily what it's designed for ergonomically. So I'm definitely going outside of what this was designed for. Now, of course, there are all sorts of accessories that you can get, such as this newer case that allows you to attach handles to the side of it. And I mean, this is really great because this lets you build out your device and use it in many different ways. I can easily attach a handle to the side of this, such as up top here, and lock this into place. And then if I had my iPhone in here, it's now a handle that I can use. So you could build this out into something that is a little bit more ergonomically friendly, but then the problem is that your phone is locked in this cage and in this system that takes away the phone functionality. I found myself, when I was in the keynote not filming different things, holding my phone this way and using my phone, kind of going through some email and posting a tweet and stuff like that. And it just was not an enjoyable experience using my phone with all of this stuff attached to it. You almost need to have a dedicated phone for this so that you're not worrying about using your phone in the standard way that it was designed to be used. So I don't know, the experience kind of falls apart ergonomically. Now, granted, I have other cameras that I can choose. I had the Sony a7C II with me, and that was definitely going to be my backup option if this fell through, because I wasn't going to want to use the Osmo Pocket 3 for everything. So I wasn't going to completely kit out my phone with some sort of accessory system. I wanted something that was going to be easy for me to just simply remove my phone from it, and then I could use my phone like this. And so that is pretty simple. You know, it's easy just to unplug the phone and then plug it back in, and MagSafe attached to the back of this. That's not too bad. But if you are writing files, for example, if you recorded video directly to your phone and you're copying files over to the SSD, that's going to need to be connected for that. So ergonomics, definitely not the best on the iPhone. You can attach things and kind of build things out to make the experience better. I'll include this phone cage, which also allows you to attach filters and all sorts of other things like lenses and fun stuff to it, in the description below, because this is definitely something that I would want to have on my phone if I was going to be filming. I'm not going to be using this as a phone for right now. I'm going to be using it as a device for capturing. If I'd put myself in that mindset, I would have been fine with using something like this. But I went with as minimal of a setup as I could so that it could be a phone, it could be a camera, and not have a whole lot of friction in between. So ergonomics is definitely something that you're going to have to consider. Is it going to be comfortable to film in this way throughout the day, considering the things that I'm going to need attached to my phone, perhaps the battery that's going to need to support my phone? What does that look like? So the last thing is file management. Now, I did talk about being able to write everything to this external drive, and that's the best case scenario. You have an external drive, you write everything to it, and then you just take that and plug it into your computer and you have all of your files there. And not every app supports that, and sometimes it can be a bit tricky and finicky. Now, if you're worried about your files not transferring or this becoming disconnected while you're shooting, thus ruining the file that you're capturing because the camera is just going to stop if it loses its connection, that is something to consider. So if you're going to be writing all of your files to the phone and then copying them to an SSD later, you better be one patient person. Now, this is an older SSD. This is the T5. I know that it only has like 500 or 600 megabytes per second read and write, and so it's not the fastest thing that's out there. There are definitely faster drives like the T7, even the T9. There are over a handful of other drives that are at least double as fast as this one. But 500 is not too bad. That's pretty decent transfer speeds, especially being that things are going over USB. And I know that we're not getting the fastest transfer speeds out of this phone. I will be curious to test the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max to see how much faster the transfer speeds over cable are there. But file transfer took a while. Initially, when I was using the Blackmagic camera app, I was writing to the internal storage of the phone, which essentially writes the files within the camera app. Now, initially, when using the Blackmagic camera app, I was just recording within the app. Connecting the SSD is not as cut and dry as it is with the iPhone camera app. The iPhone camera app simply recognizes that you have an SSD connected and then just writes to it whenever you're shooting video. But with the Blackmagic camera app, you have to navigate to a folder that you want to store everything in, perhaps even create a new folder. And it seemed to be having a little bit of issues when I was getting ready to shoot something. I was navigating and trying to figure out my file system there, and the wheel was spinning, and I thought, you know what, I can't deal with that right now. Let's just record internally. So I ended up with about 25 gigabytes of video footage within that app. And I have to say, transferring it to the SSD was extremely slow. 25 gigs is not really that much footage. I mean, the video that I'm recording right now and the camera that I'm looking into, about a 20-minute video that hopefully will be edited down to less than that, is probably going to be about 250 to 300 gigabytes. And that camera is recording that to a Samsung T9, and that Samsung T9 hooked up to my Mac could transfer everything over probably 3 or 4 times by the time that I was able to transfer those files from the Blackmagic camera app to the SSD. And it's not the Blackmagic app that caused the bottleneck. It is the slow file transfer between the iPhone and the SSD. I will definitely be testing this with faster SSDs just to see how much more of a performance increase there would be, but I can't imagine that it would be that much more, because on 2 of my other cameras I have this exact same drive, and when transferring large video files, 100 gigabyte video files over to my Mac, it still took a fraction of the time that it would take to transfer from iPhone to SSD. So I highly recommend recording from your iPhone to the SSD if you're going to do that, and then just make sure that you have a very safe and secure cabling system here so that you don't have any issues with connectivity to the SSD, because of course if that came disconnected, you'd lose your file and you'd have to start over. So I'll make sure to link up in the description some of the accessories that I'm using here. I definitely feel that this is a good system for filming on the iPhone. It works really well and is simple to use and easy to set up. I just, the things that I had to talk about are just challenges that definitely don't show up in the beautiful Apple ads and within a lot of the other content that these creators are putting out about how fun and amazing it is to shoot on an iPhone. It is fun and amazing to shoot on an iPhone, but it's not as easy as everyone makes it out to be. So check out the links in the description below. If you found this video useful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you back in another one soon. Take care.